The rain had been falling for 3 days straight in Vienna, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected the warm lights of expensive shops and restaurants. Elena stood outside the glass doors of Restaurant Amadeus, watching well-dressed people laugh and clink their wine glasses together. Her stomach hadn't stopped hurting for the past 2 days. When was the last time she'd eaten something real? Yesterday's half-eaten sandwich from a trash bin behind a bakery? Or was that 2 days ago? Time had a way of blurring together when you lived on the streets. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her body. It used to be blue, she thought, but now it was mostly gray with dirt and wear. Her fingers were sticking out of gloves that had lost their tips months ago. Those fingers. Once upon a time, they had been insured for 2 million euros. Now they were cracked and red from the cold, the nails broken and dirty. Elena took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy door. The warmth hit her first, then the smell. Fresh bread, roasted meat, wine, perfume. Her head spun slightly. The restaurant was full of people who belonged to a world she used to know. A world that now felt like it existed on another planet. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths. Silver everything. And there in the corner sat a beautiful black grand piano, shining under a spotlight like a jewel. A young man in a crisp black suit appeared in front of her immediately. His name tag said Thomas, and his nose wrinkled slightly as he looked her up and down. "Excuse me, madam, but this is a private establishment." "I'm afraid you can't, please." Elena interrupted, her voice rough from not using it much lately. "I just need to speak with the manager." "Just 1 minute." Thomas looked uncomfortable. Several diners had already turned to stare. A woman in diamonds whispered something to her husband, and they both looked over at Elena with expressions that mixed pity and disgust. "The manager is very busy tonight," Thomas said, his voice lower now, trying not to make a scene. "Perhaps if you come back another time, or maybe I can direct you to a shelter nearby." "I'll get Mr. Weber," a voice said from behind him. Elena looked up to see a young woman in a waitress uniform. She had kind eyes and a tired smile. Her name tag read, Sophie. "Sophie, don't bother Mr. Weber with this," Thomas hissed. "I'll handle it." But Sophie was already walking toward the back office. Thomas sighed and positioned himself between Elena and the dining room, as if she might suddenly dash toward a table and start grabbing food. A minute later, a large man with a thick mustache came out, smoothing down his expensive suit. Mr. Weber, the manager. Elena had seen men like him 1,000 times before. Men who measured human worth by the price of their shoes. "What seems to be the problem here?" Mr. Weber asked, directing his question to Thomas. "Not Elena, sir. This woman insists on speaking with you." Mr. Weber finally looked at Elena. His eyes did the same quick scan Thomas's had done. Homeless. Dirty. Problem. His jaw tightened. "Madam, this is not a charity kitchen. If you need assistance, I can call. I want to play your piano," Elena said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. "Just 1 piece. In exchange for a meal. Any meal. Whatever you have left in the kitchen." The silence that followed felt heavy. Then Thomas laughed. Not meanly exactly, but the way people laugh when something is so absurd it catches them off guard. "You want to play the piano?" Mr. Weber repeated slowly as if he'd heard wrong. "Yes. Just 1 piece, please." Mr. Weber shook his head. "That piano is worth more than a car." "It's a Steinway, madam." "I can't just let anyone—" "I know what it is," Elena said quietly. "I can see it's a Model D Hamburg, not New York. Probably made around 2010 from the finish, please. I just need 1 chance." Mr. Weber blinked, surprised she knew the difference. Most people wouldn't. But then he shook his head again, reaching for his phone, probably to call security. "Mr. Weber." Sophie stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "What harm could it do? Just 1 song. If she's terrible, we'll know in 30 seconds. But if we throw her out and someone records it, and it ends up online. You know how people are these days. They'd call us heartless." It was the right thing to say. Mr. Weber cared deeply about the restaurant's reputation. He looked around the dining room. A few people were still watching, phones in hands. The age of viral videos had made everyone cautious. "Fine," he said finally, his voice clipped. 1 piece. Something short. "And if you damage that piano in any way—" "I won't," Elena said quickly. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She moved toward the piano before he could change his mind. Her legs felt weak, partly from hunger, partly from fear. How long had it been since she'd played a real piano? 8 months, 9? She'd tried once at a train station, one of those public pianos, but her hands had frozen up. The memories had been too painful. She'd walked away after playing only a few notes, but tonight was different. Tonight she was desperate enough to push past the pain. As she crossed the dining room, conversation stopped. People stared openly now. Some looked curious, others annoyed that their romantic dinner was being interrupted by this strange woman who smelled like rain and streets. Elena heard someone whisper, "This should be interesting," followed by a mean little laugh. She reached the piano and stood there for a moment, just looking at it, beautiful, perfect. She pulled off her fingerless gloves with shaking hands, revealing fingers that were red and swollen, the joints aching from arthritis that had gotten so much worse from sleeping in the cold. Elena sat down on the bench. The leather was soft. The height was perfect. She adjusted it slightly, muscle memory taking over. Her feet found the pedals. She placed her hands above the keys, not touching them yet. Behind her, she heard someone say, €20 says she doesn't even know how to play. Elena closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't in this restaurant anymore. She was 25 again, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall about to walk out for her first major solo performance. She remembered the terror, the excitement, the absolute certainty that the piano was the only place in the world where she truly made sense. Her fingers touched the keys, and then Elena began to play. The first notes fell into the restaurant like drops of water into a still pond, sending ripples through the air. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that looked so damaged and worn. She had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful and difficult pieces ever written. Within seconds, the laughter stopped. The man who had bet €20 that she couldn't play froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. The woman in diamonds dropped her fork, and it clattered against her plate, but she didn't notice. Mr. Weber, who had been heading back to his office, stopped dead in his tracks and turned around slowly. The music wasn't just good. It was extraordinary. Elena's hands, those broken-looking hands with their cracked skin and swollen joints, danced across the keys like they were having a conversation with the piano. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note carried emotion so deep it made people's chests feel tight. The music spoke of loss, of longing, of a beauty so painful it almost hurt to hear. Sophie stood frozen near the kitchen door, her order pad forgotten in her hand. Tears started running down her cheeks, and she didn't even know why. There was something about the way this strange woman played that reached inside you and touched places you'd forgotten existed. The restaurant had gone completely silent except for the piano. No one was eating anymore. No one was talking. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working and were peeking through the service window, watching this impossible thing that was happening. Elena's eyes were closed. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. Her body swayed slightly with the music, completely lost in it. When she reached the piece's most difficult passages, her fingers flew so fast they became a blur, yet every single note rang out clear and true. This wasn't someone who had learned piano casually. This was a master. Someone who had dedicated their entire life to this instrument. A businessman in the corner pulled out his phone and started recording. He wasn't doing it to mock her now. He was recording because he knew he was witnessing something special, something people wouldn't believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. As the music swelled toward its emotional peak, several people in the restaurant were openly crying. An elderly couple held hands across their table, both wiping their eyes. A young man who'd been on his phone the entire evening set it down and just listened, his mouth slightly open in wonder. Thomas, the host who'd tried to throw Elena out, leaned against the wall. His face had gone pale. He'd studied music in university before deciding on hospitality instead. He knew enough to understand what he was hearing. This woman was playing at a level most pianists never reached even after a lifetime of practice. The technical precision was flawless, but that wasn't the remarkable part. Anyone with enough practice could hit the right notes. What this woman was doing was pouring her entire soul into every phrase, making the piano sing and weep and soar in ways that seemed almost impossible. The music built and built, Elena's hands moving faster, the notes cascading like waterfalls. Her whole body was involved now, leaning into the more powerful sections, pulling back for the tender moments. She played like someone who had nothing left to lose, like this might be the last time she ever touched a piano. So she was giving it everything she had, and then, after 10 minutes that felt both like seconds and hours, the piece came to its final haunting conclusion. Elena played the last notes so softly they were almost whispers. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then they fell to her lap. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena sat very still, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She looked smaller than before, like playing had taken something out of her, some final reserve of strength she'd been holding on to. Then someone started clapping. It was the elderly man whose wife's hand he'd been holding. He stood up slowly, his hands coming together in applause that sounded like thunder in the quiet restaurant. His wife stood too, clapping. Then the businessman. Then the woman in diamonds. Then everyone, the entire restaurant rising to their feet, applauding wildly. The sound seemed to startle Elena. She turned around on the piano bench, looking at all these people standing and clapping for her, and the expression on her face was one of complete confusion, as if she'd forgotten where she was, as if she'd been somewhere else entirely and the applause had pulled her back. Sophie rushed forward with a napkin, kneeling beside the piano bench. "That was beautiful," she whispered, handing Elena the napkin for her tears. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Elena took the napkin with trembling hands. "Thank you," she managed to say. Mr. Weber approached slowly, and the expression on his face had completely changed. The irritation was gone. The judgment was gone. He looked shocked and humbled. "Madam," he said quietly, I apologize for my rudeness earlier. That was—" He struggled to find words. "Where did you learn to play like that?" But before Elena could answer, an older man with gray hair and glasses stood up from a table near the window. He'd been sitting there the whole time, and now he was staring at Elena with an expression of absolute shock, his face pale. "My God," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elena Kovalenko?" The name seemed to echo in the quiet restaurant. Several people gasped. A woman near the back said, "No, that's impossible." Elena looked at the man, and recognition slowly dawned on her face. "Professor Hartman?" The professor moved toward her like he was seeing a ghost. Everyone thought you were dead. You disappeared 12 years ago. We searched everywhere. Your concerts were canceled. No one knew what happened to you. Elena, where have you been?" Sophie looked between them, confused. "I don't understand. Who is she?" Professor Hartman turned to Sophie, his eyes still wide with shock. "This woman is Elena Kovalenko. 30 years ago, she was one of the most celebrated concert pianists in Europe. She played Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall. She performed with the Berlin Philharmonic. Critics called her the greatest pianist of her generation." He looked back at Elena, his voice breaking, and then she just vanished. No one's seen her perform in over a decade. The restaurant erupted in whispers. People pulled out their phones, typing frantically. The businessman who'd recorded the performance stared at his phone screen, then at Elena, then back at his phone, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just captured. Mr. Weber's face had gone from impressed to absolutely stunned. You're Elena Kovalenko?" "The Elena Kovalenko?" Elena stood up slowly from the piano bench. She looked exhausted, like the weight of her old name was crushing her. "I was," she said quietly. "A long time ago. I'm no one now." "That's not true," Professor Hartman said firmly, stepping closer. "Elena, what happened to you? How did you end up—" He gestured helplessly at her appearance, unable to finish the question. Elena's face crumpled. For a moment it looked like she might collapse. Sophie quickly grabbed a chair and helped her sit down. "It's a long story," Elena whispered, staring at her damaged hands in her lap. "A very long, sad story." The professor knelt beside her chair. "Then tell us," he said gently, "and please. We've been worried about you for 12 years. And slowly, with the entire restaurant listening in absolute silence, Elena began to speak. Elena's hands shook as she looked around at all the faces staring at her. How could she explain 12 years in a few words? How could she make them understand how someone goes from playing in the world's greatest concert halls to sleeping under bridges? "I was married," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name was Victor. He was a conductor. Very talented, very charming. Everyone loved him." She paused, swallowing hard. "At first I loved him too. Professor Hartman pulled up a chair beside her and Sophie brought her a glass of water. Elena drank it gratefully, her hands wrapped around the glass like it was precious. The first few years were good. We performed together sometimes. He conducted while I played. People called us the perfect musical couple. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. But Victor had a temper. When things didn't go his way, when his career wasn't moving as fast as he wanted, he needed someone to blame, and I was there. The restaurant remained silent. Even Mr. Weber, who usually rushed around managing everything, stood perfectly still listening. It started small. Criticism of my playing, comments about my appearance. Then he started controlling where I went, who I saw. He said other musicians were jealous of us, that they wanted to break us apart. He made me cancel concerts. He said I needed to support his career more, that mine was taking too much attention away from his. Sophie's hand went to her mouth. She'd heard stories like this before, but hearing it from this extraordinary woman made it hurt even more. One night, after a concert where I'd received a standing ovation, Elena's voice cracked. He told me I'd embarrassed him, that I'd played too well and made him look ordinary. That's when he hit me for the first time. She touched her left cheek as if she could still feel it, not in the face where people could see. He was smart about it. Always where clothing would cover the bruises. Professor Hartman's eyes filled with tears. Elena, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. You always seemed so happy when we saw you perform. I became very good at pretending, Elena said quietly. Performers are actors too, aren't they? We smile on stage no matter what we're feeling inside. She took another sip of water, gathering strength to continue. It got worse over the years. He isolated me from everyone. He controlled all our money. He said if I ever left him, he'd destroy my reputation, tell everyone I was difficult to work with, unstable. And I believed him. I'd seen what happened to other musicians when rumors started about them. Their careers ended. But you did leave, Professor Hartman said gently. What made you finally go? Elena's hands clenched together. 12 years ago, he broke 3 of my fingers on my right hand. He slammed the piano lid down on them during an argument. He said if I was going to play better than him, maybe I shouldn't play at all. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Several people looked away, unable to hear more. I went to the hospital. I told them I'd trapped my hand in a door. They believed me because I was so calm, so convincing. But while I was there, recovering, something changed inside me. I looked at my bandaged hand and I thought, if I go back next time he might kill me. So I didn't go back. You just left? Sophie asked softly. I walked out of that hospital with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. No phone, no money, no identification. Victor had kept all of that locked in his office. I was terrified he'd find me, so I ran. I stayed in shelters at first, but I was always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. Elena looked down at her damaged hands. My fingers healed, but not properly. I never got the surgery I needed. I couldn't go to any doctors Victor might contact. And then arthritis set in. Without treatment, it got worse and worse. Every winter when the cold came, the pain got so bad I could barely move my hands. But why didn't you reach out to someone? Professor Hartman asked, his voice full of anguish. To me, to your other colleagues? We would have helped you. Shame, Elena said simply. I was ashamed. How could I tell the world that the great Elena Kovalenko was living in a shelter? That she'd let a man destroy her? That she couldn't even play anymore because her hands were too damaged? And I was scared. Victor had connections everywhere in the music world. I thought if I contacted anyone from my old life, he'd find me. She wiped her eyes with the napkin Sophie had given her. Over time, I got worse. Depression, I think, though I never saw a doctor. I started believing I deserved what had happened to me. I stopped going to shelters, started sleeping outside. It felt safer somehow being invisible, just another homeless person no one looks at. The businessman who'd recorded her performance spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. But you can still play. Tonight proved that. Your hands may hurt, but you haven't lost your gift. This is the first time I've played a full piece in 8 months, Elena admitted. Every time I tried, the memories were too painful. The piano reminded me of everything I'd lost. But tonight I was so hungry, so desperate that I pushed past the fear. And once I started playing, she smiled sadly. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It felt like coming home. Professor Hartman stood up suddenly. This is unacceptable. Elena, you're not staying on the streets another night. I'm calling my wife right now. We have a guest room. You'll stay with us. You can and you will, he said firmly. And tomorrow we're getting you to a doctor to look at those hands. Then we're calling the Vienna Conservatory. Do you know how many of your former students are teaching there now? They'll be overjoyed to know you're alive." Elena shook her head. "Professor, you don't understand. I can't just go back to that life. I've been gone too long. I'm not that person anymore." "Maybe not," Professor Hartman said gently. "But you're still Elena Kovalenko. The music world never forgot you. People still ask about you, still play your recordings. Do you know your recording of Chopin's Nocturnes is considered definitive? Students still study it." "Really?" Elena looked up surprised. "Really?" The professor pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my colleague at the conservatory right now. Friedrich has been looking for you for years. He never believed you just disappeared by choice." As Professor Hartman stepped away to make his call, Sophie sat down next to Elena. "What he said about shame," Sophie said quietly. "I understand that. My sister went through something similar. It took her 5 years to leave. The shame kept her silent longer than the fear did." Elena looked at this young woman who'd been the first to show her kindness tonight. "Your sister, is she okay now?" "She's better," Sophie said. "It took time and help and therapy. But she's better. You can be too." Mr. Weber approached looking uncomfortable. "Madam, I mean Ms. Kovalenko, I want to apologize again for how I treated you when you arrived. He struggled for words. "I was wrong. Please let me prepare you a proper meal. Anything you want." "Just something simple," Elena said. "I haven't eaten much lately. My stomach probably can't handle anything too rich." "Soup," Sophie suggested. "I'll bring you our best soup, some bread and tea. Gentle foods." As Sophie headed to the kitchen, Professor Hartman returned, his face excited. "Friedrich nearly dropped his phone when I told him. He's coming here right now." "And Elena," he said. The professor's voice became emotional. "He said he never stopped believing you'd come back to music someday." Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can do this. So many people are looking at me, talking about me." "One step at a time," Professor Hartman said. "Tonight you eat. You come home with us, you rest. Tomorrow we worry about everything else." Sophie returned with a bowl of vegetable soup and warm bread. The smell made Elena's stomach clench with hunger. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took her first bite. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Around them, the restaurant slowly came back to life, but it was different now. People were talking in hushed, respectful tones. Several had tears on their cheeks. The businessman was still holding his phone, staring at the video he'd recorded, knowing he'd captured something extraordinary. And Elena ate her soup slowly, each spoonful a small miracle, while around her, the wheels of her return to the world began to turn. The video appeared online at 11 o'clock that night. The businessman who'd recorded Elena's performance uploaded it to social media with a simple caption: "Homeless woman asks to play piano for food. Listen to what happens next." Within an hour, it had 5,000 views. By morning, 5 million. By the end of the second day, 50 million people had watched Elena play Rachmaninoff in that Vienna restaurant. Elena knew nothing about this at first. That night, Professor Hartman had taken her to his home, where his wife had prepared a warm bath and found clean clothes. Elena had cried in the bathroom, overwhelmed by simple things she'd forgotten existed. Hot water, clean towels, a door that locked from the inside so she felt safe. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the person staring back. She slept for 14 hours straight in their guest room, the first real sleep she'd had in months. No fear of someone stealing her things, no cold. No sounds of traffic or other people arguing nearby. Just silence and warmth and a soft bed. When she woke up, Professor Hartman's wife, Ingrid, was making breakfast. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the house. Elena came downstairs slowly, still not quite believing this was real. "Good morning," Ingrid said warmly. "How did you sleep?" "Like the dead," Elena replied, then smiled slightly. "That's probably not the right expression." "I think it's perfect," Ingrid said, pouring coffee. "Sit down. Eat. My husband has been on the phone all morning." As if summoned by his name, Professor Hartman rushed into the kitchen, his phone in his hand and his face flushed with excitement. "Elena, you need to see this. The video of you playing last night has gone viral. Millions of people have watched it." Elena's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What video?" He showed her his phone. There she was on the screen, sitting at the piano in her dirty clothes, tears on her face, playing with everything she had. The comment section was flooded with reactions. People from all over the world writing in dozens of languages. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I'm crying at my desk at work. Who is this woman? Someone please find out who she is, the way she plays. This isn't just talent. This is a lifetime of dedication." Elena's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. Thousands and thousands of them. "It gets better," Professor Hartman said. "Or more overwhelming, depending on how you look at it. People have started identifying you. Your former students, other musicians. They're sharing stories about you." He showed her another post from a man named Rudolph who'd studied under her 25 years ago. "This is Elena Kovalenko," he'd written. "She was my teacher at the Vienna Conservatory. She changed my life. She didn't just teach technique, she taught us to find our souls in the music. I became a professional pianist because of her. Seeing her like this breaks my heart." Another post from a woman named Katrina. "I performed with Elena in Moscow in 1998. She was the kindest person. After the concert, she spent hours with young music students who'd waited to meet her. She gave them advice, encouragement, even helped some of them financially. This woman is a treasure. How did we let her slip through the cracks?" More posts kept appearing. Concert organizers who'd worked with her, fellow musicians who remembered her generosity, students whose lives she'd changed, critics who'd called her performances transcendent. Everyone wanted to know what had happened to her, how they could help. By the afternoon, news organizations were calling. The story was irresistible. A legendary pianist, thought to be dead or disappeared, found living on the streets but still possessing her incredible gift. Professor Hartman fielded the calls, checking with Elena before agreeing to anything. "I don't know if I can do interviews," Elena said nervously. "What do I even say?" "You tell the truth," Ingrid said gently. "Your story could help other people in similar situations." That evening, Elena sat down with a journalist from a major Austrian newspaper. The woman was respectful, asking questions carefully, never pushing too hard. Elena told her story, the abuse, the escape, the years of hiding and shame, how depression had made her believe she deserved what happened, how she'd been too afraid and too proud to ask for help. The article appeared online the next morning. "The Return of Elena Kovalenko, a Story of Survival in Music," read the headline. It was honest and raw and human. Elena cried reading it, seeing her life laid out in black and white. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A crowdfunding campaign appeared within hours, started by one of Elena's former students. The goal was €20,000 to help with medical bills and housing. Within 3 hours, it reached 50,000. By the end of the first day, 100,000. By the end of the week, the campaign had raised over €200,000 from people in 70 countries. The comments on the fundraising page made Elena cry every time she read them. "My mother was in an abusive marriage. I understand the shame and fear. Thank you for speaking out. I'm a pianist because of your recordings. You inspired me. Let me help you now. You survived. That takes more strength than most people will ever understand. Music saved me from my darkest times. I want to help make sure you can keep playing." Television networks wanted interviews. Elena agreed to a few, always nervous, always afraid she'd say the wrong thing. But people responded to her honesty. When she talked about how shame had kept her silent, how she'd believed she deserved her suffering, thousands of people reached out saying they understood, that they'd felt the same way. One morning, Sophie from the restaurant showed up at Professor Hartman's house with flowers. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," she said. "That night changed my life. Seeing your courage, hearing your story, I've been thinking about my own sister, wondering if I could have helped her sooner if I'd known the signs." "Your kindness that night saved me," Elena said, hugging her. "You were the first person in so long to look at me like I was human." They became friends after that. Sophie visited often, bringing news from the restaurant. Mr. Weber had called her personally, Sophie reported. He wanted to do something to make up for how he'd treated Elena. He was proposing a benefit concert at the restaurant, with all proceeds going to organizations that helped homeless musicians and domestic violence survivors. "He's serious about it," Sophie said. "He's already talking to sponsors. He wants to make it a big event." Meanwhile, doctors at Vienna's best hospital offered free treatment for Elena's hands. The arthritis was advanced, they said, but not hopeless. With proper medication, physical therapy, and some minor procedures, she could manage the pain better. She'd never have her hands back to full strength, but she could play again. Really play. Friedrich, the colleague Professor Hartmann had called that first night, visited regularly. He offered Elena a position at the conservatory. Not a full teaching load, just a few students. Whenever you're ready, he said. There's no pressure. But Elena, you have so much to offer, so much wisdom that shouldn't be lost. The viral video kept growing. It appeared on news broadcasts around the world. Late-night talk shows mentioned it. Musicians posted reaction videos analyzing her technique, marveling at her emotion. A famous conductor tweeted, "This is what music is meant to be. Pure emotion, pure truth." Elena Kovalenko is a reminder that real art comes from lived experience, from pain transformed into beauty. Through it all, Elena felt like she was watching someone else's life. How had she gone from sleeping under a bridge to being interviewed on television? From eating from trash bins to having dinner with old friends and colleagues? It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. One evening, Professor Hartmann found her sitting alone in the guest room, crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Nothing's wrong," she said. "That's why I'm crying. For the first time in 12 years, nothing's wrong. I'm safe. I'm warm. People care about me. I can play piano again. I don't know how to handle it." He sat down beside her. "You handle it one day at a time. Just like you survived one day at a time. Except now the days are better." That night, Elena sat at the professor's piano and played for hours. Her hands hurt, but it was a good hurt. A productive hurt. The kind of pain that came from using muscles that had been dormant too long. She played everything she'd kept locked inside for years. All the fear, all the shame, all the hope she'd been too afraid to feel. And somewhere, millions of people were still watching that video, still sharing her story, still proving that sometimes the world does notice. Sometimes help does come. Sometimes even when you think you're invisible, someone sees you. 6 months passed like a dream that Elena kept expecting to end, but it didn't. Winter turned to spring, and with the warmer weather came changes that felt impossible just months before. Elena moved into a small apartment near the conservatory. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it had something she'd gone without for so long. It was hers. A safe place with a door she could lock, windows that let in sunlight, and in the corner of the main room sat an upright piano, donated by one of her former students. The medical treatments helped more than the doctors had hoped. The arthritis was still there, would always be there, but with proper medication and daily exercises, Elena could play for hours without the crippling pain she'd endured before. Her hands would never be what they were at 25, but they were good enough. More than good enough. She started teaching again, just 3 students at first. Young pianists from the conservatory who were talented but struggling to find their voice. Elena understood struggle now in ways she never had during her first career. She didn't just teach them technique. She taught them that mistakes were part of growth, that vulnerability made music real, that surviving difficult things gave you something precious to share. One of her students, a shy girl named Hannah who'd been ready to quit music entirely, bloomed under Elena's guidance. "You make me feel like it's okay to be imperfect," Hannah told her once. "Like the broken parts of me can make the music better instead of worse." Elena hugged her, remembering when she thought her own broken parts had ruined everything. But the moment everyone had been waiting for was approaching. The benefit concert at Restaurant Amadeus. Mr. Weber had been planning it for months, treating it like the most important event of his life, which in a way it was. He'd told Elena privately that seeing her that night, dismissing her so quickly, had changed something in him. "I realized how many people I probably looked past in my life," he'd said. "I want to do better." The concert was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late April. All 300 tickets sold out in under 2 hours. The cheapest seats were €200, and every cent was going to 2 organizations. One that helped homeless musicians get back on their feet, and another that supported domestic violence survivors. The week before the concert, Elena couldn't sleep. Old fears kept creeping back. What if she froze on stage? What if her hands gave out in the middle of a piece? What if everyone was disappointed and realized she wasn't the legendary pianist they remembered? Sophie, who'd become one of Elena's closest friends, came over with tea and common sense. "You're not the same person who disappeared 12 years ago," she said. And that's good. That Elena was brilliant but scared. This Elena is brilliant and brave. People aren't coming to see perfection. They're coming to see you. I don't know what to play, Elena admitted. Nothing feels right. Play what you played that first night, Sophie suggested. That's what changed everything. Elena shook her head. That was Rachmaninoff's second. It's meant for piano and orchestra. I can't do it justice alone, Wing, then don't do it alone. The idea came together quickly after that. Friedrich at the conservatory had connections with the Vienna Chamber Orchestra. Within days, they'd agreed to perform. Not for money, though, Mr. Weber offered. They wanted to be part of the story, they said. Part of something that mattered. The night of the concert arrived warm and clear. Elena stood backstage at the restaurant, which had been completely transformed. They'd removed half the tables to fit in chairs for the audience. The orchestra sat where diners usually ate their desserts. News cameras lined the back wall. This wasn't just a local event anymore. It was being live-streamed around the world. Professor Hartmann found Elena in the small prep room Mr. Weber had set up for her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but good terrified. The kind that means something matters. You don't have to do this, you know. No one would blame you if I want to," Elena interrupted. "For 12 years I was invisible. Now I have a chance to be seen, and to help others be seen too. I'm not wasting that." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Your parents would be so proud of you." At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. The audience, packed into every available space, fell silent. Mr. Weber walked to the center of the makeshift stage. "Looking nervous. 6 months ago," he began. "A woman walked into my restaurant and asked if she could play piano in exchange for food. I almost threw her out." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I'm ashamed of that. But I'm grateful that someone on my staff had more compassion than I did. That night changed my life. It reminded me that we never really see people unless we choose to look. Tonight we're here because Elena Kovalenko chose to be brave. And I hope we all choose to see a little more clearly from now on." The audience applauded. Sophie, sitting in the front row wearing her best dress, wiped her eyes. Mr. Weber continued. "All proceeds tonight go to helping people who've been overlooked, forgotten, or cast aside. People like Elena once was, because everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone deserves to be seen." More applause. Then Mr. Weber stepped aside and the conductor raised his baton. Elena walked onto the stage. She wore a simple black dress that Ingrid had helped her choose. Her hair was clean and styled, but the biggest difference was in her face. She wasn't trying to disappear anymore. She wasn't trying to be invisible. She walked to the piano with her head up, and when she sat down and looked out at the audience, she smiled. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I played this piece because I was desperate and hungry. Tonight, I'm playing it because I'm grateful and free. And I'm playing it for everyone who's still invisible, still scared, still thinking they don't deserve help. You do. You deserve everything." The audience erupted in applause, but Elena had already turned to the piano. The conductor gave her a nod. The orchestra lifted their instruments and Elena began to play. This time was different from that first night. Then she'd played like someone pouring out their last hope. Now she played like someone who'd found hope again and wanted to share it. The music soared through the restaurant, powerful and achingly beautiful. The orchestra followed her lead, surrounding her notes with layers of sound that made the piece even more magnificent. Elena's hands moved across the keys, and yes, they hurt a bit. They probably always would. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the moment, the hundreds of people listening with tears streaming down their faces. What mattered was the thousands more watching online from around the world, many of them facing their own struggles. Hearing in Elena's playing a promise that things could get better. When she reached the final, haunting notes, Elena played them so softly they were almost whispers, exactly as she had 6 months before. But this time, when her hands fell to her lap and she bowed her head, it wasn't in despair. It was in gratitude. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. People were crying openly. The cameras captured it all. Elena stood and bowed, then gestured to the orchestra, making sure they received recognition too. But the audience wanted her, needed to celebrate her, needed this story to have a happy ending because so many stories didn't. Afterward, Elena stayed for hours, talking to people. Some were her former students. Some were complete strangers who just wanted to thank her for being brave enough to share her story. One woman pulled Elena aside and whispered, "I'm leaving my husband next week. Your story gave me the courage. Thank you." Elena held her hands and gave her the number for a shelter, resources for help. Everything she wished she'd known 12 years ago. Near midnight, when the restaurant finally emptied, Elena sat at the piano one more time. Sophie joined her, sitting on the bench beside her. "You did it," Sophie said. "We did it," Elena corrected. "If you hadn't spoken up that night, none of this happens." "Maybe," Sophie said. "Or maybe it just would have happened somewhere else, some other time. You were always going to find your way back to the piano. That's who you are." Elena looked at her hands resting on the keys. Weathered hands. Damaged hands. Hands that had survived impossible things and still made beauty. "I used to think my worth was in being perfect," she said quietly. "In playing every note exactly right, in being the best, the most celebrated. Now I know my worth is in being honest, in surviving, in helping others survive." She played a few soft notes. Nothing complicated, just a simple melody that sounded like peace. "What's next?" Sophie asked. Elena smiled. "I start teaching more students next month. Young people who think their struggles disqualify them from making art. I'm going to show them that struggle is what makes the art matter." She paused. "And I'm going to keep telling my story. As long as it helps even one person feel less alone, I'll keep telling it." Outside, Vienna glowed with streetlights and possibility. Inside, Elena played her simple melody while her friend listened. It wasn't fancy music. It wasn't concert hall worthy. But it was real and true and enough. And for the first time in 12 years, Elena knew that she was enough too. Broken and healing, imperfect and brave, seen and valued and home.